On the flight back to Washington, D.C., which was an extremely somber one, I had the opportunity to sit alone with General Weyand, recalling the connection we had from our time together at MACV headquarters. Weyand was one of the most thoughtful military officers I had ever dealt with, and I told him my assessment and gave him my unvarnished take on all of this. And I remember he just emitted a sigh as I described to him. And I then went back and sat down and drafted my memo to Henry Kissinger, because I was on his staff. I had been providing input on phone calls every day back to Bill Stearman, who conveyed my assessments to the Washington Working Group that Kissinger was leading in Washington, D.C. I had been giving him this unvarnished, highly pessimistic picture, and which was much more pessimistic than anything the embassy and Ambassador Martin were sending back. In fact, Kissinger was so startled by it, he kept asking, where is this coming from? So I wrote the memo to Kissinger, and I said in it that the North Vietnamese had the South Vietnamese outnumbered 2-1. Without any U.S. Air Force to bomb the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they were able to bring all of their field guns and artillery, all their tanks, to the south and concentrate them. And they had their anti-aircraft weapons. So the South Vietnamese Air Force tried to come and attack, their anti-aircraft weapons could knock the South Vietnamese planes out of the air. North Vietnam had not only numerical superiority, they now had technological superiority. Their field guns fired farther than the artillery we had given to the South. Their anti-aircraft weapons could defeat the Air Force that we had built among South Vietnam. They had more tanks, and what they would do is concentrate their forces and one by one attack and bombard and then overrun the South Vietnamese. And they were picking off the major cities along the way and moving ineluctably towards Saigon. And as I said, it was just a matter of when they would make the decision. And I told in my memo to Kissinger that the end could come as quickly as 2 or 3 weeks. It all depended on what the North Vietnamese decided, that as many as 1 million people would want to leave, and that the only thing that could stop them would be a reintervention of the United States into the war, or somehow some diplomatic approach, whether it's through the Soviets or whomever, to try to convince them to stop short and not overrun Saigon and totally defeat the South, to have some sort of negotiated end. 25 years later, in 2000, all of the papers relating to Vietnam that were in the Ford Museum, Presidential Museum in Grand Rapids, were declassified and made available to a historian named Douglas Brinkley, who wrote an essay for Time magazine. And I remember getting a call. I was now working, retired and working for the World Food Prize. And I got a call that reached me while I was visiting Loras College in Dubuque, where I had graduated. And it was Richard Holbrooke saying, "Have you seen the article in Time magazine?" And I said, no. And he told me it said that within the United States government, a National Security Council staff member named Kenneth Quinn had provided the grimmest but most accurate assessment of the last days of Vietnam of anybody in the U.S. government. And so, of course, I look back on my career, and at this moment of this terrible defeat, probably the worst moment of U.S. foreign policy history, that I had played a role, and that somewhere I would be this footnote to history of having been there on the ground, seen what was coming, accurately predicted what the end would be, and had conveyed that to my boss, Henry Kissinger.